was Nathan Law. I've been speaking to Tom Grundy. He's editor-in-chief of Hong Kong Free Press.
Last year's protests, of course, were largely leaderless, these pro-democracy demonstrations and unrest that were originally against an extradition law. And, of course, free assembly is meant to be guaranteed in Hong Kong as well. But this dates back to just over a year ago when thousands of angry protesters gathered outside police headquarters in the early months of the demonstrations, protesting against the use of force. I was down there on the ground, and it was very angry scenes of people belting out slogans, including, release the martyrs, shame on police thugs, whilst others were vandalizing the building, throwing eggs, destroying CCTV cameras, and scrawling graffiti with, let's say, some unkind words for the force. And now, after 10,000 arrests and many months of tear gas, petrol bombs, there have been thousands of these cases now going through the courts. These three very high-profile activists, of course, sentenced today.
They all made the decision to plead guilty, and these convictions come against the backdrop of a much broader crackdown following the imposition of a national security law. Outline for us their thinking in terms of pleading guilty.
Magistrate Lily Wong, in this particular case, said that they had incited acts, posed a threat to personal safety, to people at the scene, caused disruption to traffic, wasted police time. And she said to deter others, immediate imprisonment was the only appropriate option. But as you mentioned, there is a whole backdrop here of an ongoing crackdown since June in light of the national security law. And that was meant to criminalize subversion, secession, foreign interference, terrorist acts. Of course, this is one character Beijing certainly wants off the streets. And critics have said that this law is going to be used quite broadly to target dissent. And indeed, since then, we have seen dozens of activists like the trio rounded up. A protest slogan has been made illegal, another protest song banned in schools, and democracy books pulled from library shelves.
Is it your sense that there will just continue to be sporadic protests, or that there will continue to be activism that will re-emerge from time to time? Or are people genuinely frightened about the way in which this national security law might be used?
There is a low point, I guess, in the movement at the moment. In terms of street protests, particularly on the scale that we saw last year, anyone risking going onto the streets right now risks COVID-19 social gathering fines, action under the national security law. So the era, perhaps, of street protests, the days are numbered. There is a lot of debate and thinking now as to what other sort of mini acts of resistance or what can still be done under the context of this very broadly worded and quite draconian national security law.
Is there any indication what kind of conditions they're going to be kept in prison?
Well, certainly they have already been in prison for the last week. They will certainly be put to work. Joshua Wong has already spent some days in solitary confinement after the officers said that something was contained in his stomach following an X-ray. Agnes, who has never been to prison, appeared to be a lot more distraught about the prospect. She actually burst into tears as the sentencing was read out. But as for Ivan and Joshua, they will be replying to people's letters, will likely be doing some sort of labour, and will be taking it more in their stride, I imagine.
Tom Grundy, editor-in-chief of Hong Kong Free Press.